after talking about the terrible conditions of frostbite he suffered when he was in slavery.
Yes.
He says that he could place the pen with which he is writing in the gash in his foot, which immediately brings the slave body, the collocation of the slave body, into not only proximate relation to the writing self, but almost displaces that writing self with an image that refuses to be sublated into writing. It's as if that image that has now become so traumatizingly real has interrupted the very scene of writing.
Scene of writing for Frederick Douglass, I think, is bound up in the scenes, these scopophilic scenes of torture and pornotropic violence that's visited upon the black slave woman's body. The very beginning of the narrative, I think it's very important for students reading this book to realize that there is a correspondence that's symbolically drawn between the master and the master's whip and the pen that writes this narrative. If Master Anthony is able to whip Aunt Hester so that she cries and also to whip her so that she is made to hush, that implement of the whip is not just punitive in that moment, but it's expressive. It's like a stylus. It is making, it is calling forth and also stymieing vocality, African vocality in this moment. And a reproductive African vocality is being stymied there as well. But you're right, there's so many of these moments of, you call it a collocation, a kind of, let's call it an obliteration of the distance, of the figurative distance. And I think that obliteration is also violent in the slave scene, because the pen is a power that is writing into and writing onto. Douglass is the subject that is both able to write himself into being, but he's also, in again, a pathetic and amazing way, the ground for another's writing. Slavery has written its abusive history onto his very back. His back becomes a text or a page that others are invited to read. And Douglass, in his text and in his own personal self-presentation, he spent his entire life struggling with that paradox. How to be both the kind of vocalizer that Captain Anthony is able to be with his brutal pen/whip, but then also how to be both a sort of representative, the subjected body of the slave that he also very importantly feels himself connected to.
In the slave song to which you've already alluded, Douglass recalls this remarkable set of observations. They would compose and sing as they went along, consulting neither time nor tune. The thought that came up came out, if not in the word, in the sound, and as frequently in the one as in the other. They would sometimes sing the most pathetic sentiment in the most rapturous tone, and the most rapturous sentiment in the most pathetic tone. This collocation of sound and image, this collocation of otherwise completely opposed affects, this collocation of moving and somehow arresting movement through engagement with the sound that is conveying the movement, all of those produce auratic dimensions of the narrating that is unanswerable to any existing narrative logic. It seems to produce a dispossessive figurality, even in the act of indexing it. There's something that's happening in those lines that seems to indicate all of the paradoxes of possession and dispossession, of mastery and enslavement, of that which can be appropriated as a property like the tourism on the plantation estates that can continue to monetize slavery, and that which cannot possibly be converted into any currency other than the sheer duration of those sounds that could convert that sonic scape into a recording or into a narrative space that could begin to stabilize it, to render it anything other than always already fugitive.
Yes, you know, there's when I try to discuss this with students, I'm usually forced to go to the board to create charts and to map ourselves in relation to this, because it's so complicated. The narrative begins with questions of epistemology being introduced and then exploded for Douglas. How is it that anybody knows who they are, how old they are, where they come from? All of this knowledge is revoked in media res for the slave. The slave comes into the world not with the world already in its business, but with the world already having stolen this knowledge or made this knowledge unavailable to the one who might seem to think that knowledge of the self is logical and good and proper. But that basic commonsensical logic is not part of our entry into this text or the slave's entry into the world. And I think that that initial trauma, it's a trauma of not knowing. And not of not knowing knowledge that cannot be known, but of not being allowed to have knowledge that others know. And then also, so we've got these categories of orders of knowledge and who's allowed to have the knowledge and whose knowledge is associated with what. And for Douglas, animals figure heavily in this way in which knowledge, human knowledge and the knowledge of others can be confused. Proximity to animals is a way in which the slave is also kept from the knowledge that ought to be his or hers.